Have you ever heard of real stories that happen on Halloween? Well, that date, which for many is just about costumes and celebration, has actually led to some very strange and sinister events. Let me tell you about an incident that happened on Halloween in the United States, something that could easily be in a horror movie, but it was real. It was Halloween night in a small town in rural Illinois in 1962. As always, the neighborhood was filled with children going door to door for treats. The Parker House, a typical family home in the area, was known for its spooky decorations and, of course, the generous amount of candy they gave out. But on that particular night, something really strange happened. In the middle of the evening, a group of children arrived at the Parker's house and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. All the lights were off, which was odd because, as I said, the Parkers loved the Halloween tradition and always prepared for it. Neighbors, curious, started talking about how the house seemed too quiet, especially for a family that typically went all out to liven up the neighborhood. A bit later, things got even stranger. Some neighbors claimed they saw a figure moving through the house. But the weirdest part was that it was a tall figure dressed as a ghost. You know, the white sheet, classic look. But this figure moved slowly, as if observing what was going on outside. Some kids even swore they saw the ghost looking directly at them through the window. As time went on, the neighbors grew so concerned they called the police, as the silence and that apparition seemed unusual. When the police arrived, they knocked on the door, called out for the Parkers, but got no response. After a few attempts, they decided to break in to see what was going on. And that's when things got even more tense. Inside, the house was fully decorated for Halloween. Pumpkins, fake cobwebs, dim lighting. But the place was completely empty. The police searched all the rooms and found no sign of the family. No furniture out of place, no mess. It was as if the house had been set up for the holiday, but the Parkers had simply vanished. The scariest part, however, was yet to come. One of the officers found a small staircase leading to the basement. Upon descending, he stumbled upon something that chilled him to the bone. On the floor, there were several footprints. Small footprints, like children's and others larger. But they all looked as if they'd been made by wet feet. It was as if several people had walked through the basement barefoot and then simply disappeared. Beside the footprints, they found a message written in something red that looked like paint, but was chilling nonetheless. Never forget Halloween. To this day, no one knows what happened to the Parkers that night. Some say the family planned to disappear and left town. Others swear it was some kind of Halloween ritual or curse. The only thing known for sure is that after that night, the house became known as haunted. And believe it or not, no one has lived there since. Residents of the town say that every Halloween, you can see a figure dressed in white at the window, watching the children pass by. And every year, this story only grows more famous and more bizarre. Ever since my sister started talking about Halloween, she only had one thing on her mind: trick-or-treating. And as her older brother, I didn't have much choice but to tag along in her search for candy. She dressed up as a little witch with a huge hat and a cape that dragged on the ground. Me? I wore the same jacket as always, with my hood pulled down low. For me, the night was just another stroll around the neighborhood, but for her, it was the biggest adventure of the year. We were on a quiet street, already well decorated with pumpkins, hanging ghosts, and fake spider webs. Each house looked scarier than the last. and my sister beamed with excitement every time we knocked on a door. Her bag was nearly full when something caught my attention. An abandoned house at the end of the street that looked way more sinister than I remembered. Actually, nobody had lived there for years. Everyone said it was haunted, and the kids in the neighborhood never dared to go near it. But, to my surprise, someone seemed to be there that night. Across the street, near the abandoned house, stood a strange figure, a clown. At first, I thought it was just another person in costume. He stood perfectly still, almost like a statue, and it seemed like he was looking directly at us. I laughed a bit, thinking it was just an attempt to scare passing kids, and kept pulling my sister away from there. But, of course, she noticed the clown and got curious. "Is he looking at us?" she whispered, eyes wide. I said something like, "Forget him. He's just someone in costume." But inside, I'll admit, something about that figure left me uneasy. There was something off about how he was standing, without moving, like a statue. Suddenly, he started making a gesture, waving us over. But instead of coming our way, he pointed toward the abandoned house, like he was inviting us over. I felt a chill run down my spine, and the painted smile on his face seemed more disturbing than any Halloween decoration I'd seen. I grabbed my sister's hand, who was hesitating, and said, "We should go. There are still lots of houses to visit." But, for some reason, she was almost mesmerized, staring at the clown, like he was really calling us. She even took a step towards the abandoned house, like she was about to accept his invitation. I held her firmly and told her that Guy was weird and that it was better to keep our distance. But she looked at me and half laughed, half scared, saying, "But he's just playing, right? It's Halloween." Just then, the clown took a step in our direction, always pointing at the abandoned house. The strange thing was, even though we were surrounded by other kids and families, it seemed like we were the only ones seeing the clown. Nobody else looked his way. Nobody seemed to notice. The street grew quieter. Everything around felt distorted, and I started to think it was a terrible idea to stay there any longer. I felt like if we took one more step, we'd be walking right into a trap. With my hand firmly on my sister's shoulder, I looked into her eyes and said, in the calmest voice I could muster, "We're going home. Now." She, seeing I was serious, finally stopped trying to see more and began walking back with me. But as we turned our backs, I could see out of the corner of my eye that the clown was still watching us, with that same eerie smile. The walk back felt way longer, and I only felt safe when I looked and saw our house getting closer. My sister kept glancing back, trying to spot the clown again, but I pulled my hood down and tried to ignore it. Finally, when we turned the corner, he was gone. Only the abandoned house was there, dark and empty, as always. When we got home, for the first time that night, my sister didn't complain. She left her candy aside and sat quietly, giving me a confused look. "I guess that clown wasn't playing, huh?" she whispered, as if she understood the danger. I just nodded and, as calmly as I could, said, "He wasn't." It was better that we didn't go there. That night, for the first time, she accepted the idea of going to bed early. After that Halloween, we never went near that house again. And every year, I retell this story so my sister remembers never to follow strangers, not even on Halloween. She laughs now and thinks it was all just make-believe. But me, to this day, when I remember that clown standing there in the dark, I know we made the right choice by not following his invitation. On Halloween night, my brother Caleb and I decided to explore an abandoned house at the end of our street. It was a creepy, old place, and most people in town avoided it. But that night, driven by the thrill of doing something scary, we wanted to confront our fears. With flashlights and shaky courage, we went in through the back door, which creaked so loudly it felt like we were the first to touch it in years. Inside, the darkness was suffocating, and the silence pressed in on us, broken only by our hesitant footsteps on the creaky floorboards. Walking through the dusty, shadowy hallways, I noticed that all the windows were boarded up, shutting out any light from outside. Shadows twisted in strange shapes, and every step we took gave me the uneasy sense that we were being watched. At one point, I heard a soft whisper that made my skin crawl, but I convinced myself it was just the wind slipping through the wooden cracks. We eventually came to a room where we noticed something unsettling. Fresh, muddy footprints leading down to the basement. I wanted to turn back, but Caleb, who was braver than me, insisted we should follow them. So, with shaky breaths, we descended the narrow staircase, each step feeling like it was pulling us deeper into something awful. The musty smell down there was overwhelming, and with every step, I felt more claustrophobic. At the bottom, the muddy tracks stopped right in front of a metal door, rusted shut and looking like it hadn't been touched in ages. Then, we heard it, a faint, muffled laugh. I looked at Caleb, my heart racing, and he looked just as nervous. I wanted to back out, but Caleb, fueled by a strange curiosity, pushed hard against the door, breaking the old lock. When the door finally swung open, a blast of cold air hit us, and inside was the eeriest sight. A tiny, empty room with just a single chair in the middle. Deep scratches covered the walls, like someone had frantically tried to escape. Panicked, I turned to go back up the stairs, but as I started to climb, I realized the door at the top had somehow closed on its own, trapping us inside. Caleb threw himself against it, trying to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. Then, the laughter came back, louder this time, echoing around us like some invisible force was there, mocking us. My flashlight started flickering, and in the dark, I felt a sudden, icy touch on my shoulder. I screamed, batting at the air, but there was nothing there. After what felt like forever, my flashlight steadied, and just then, with a loud bang, the door above us flew open. Caleb and I bolted out of that house without looking back, leaving behind whatever secrets it held. Breathless, we stopped only when we reached the street. When we finally looked back, we saw something that made my blood freeze. In one of the dark windows, a shadowy figure stood watching us, almost like it was laughing at the terror we'd felt. If you like this content, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. Thank you and see you in the next video.